Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
We need to roll back the state. We spy on all of our own citizens. Our prisons are flooded with nonviolent drug offenders. If you want to know who America's next enemy is, look at who we're funding right now. Every single one of these problems are a result of government being way too big.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network. Here's your host, Dave Smith.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I'm Dave Smith, the truth, Libertarian Tupac, realest motherfucker you know. Wait, what was my thing? This most consistent motherfucker you know. I have been up for what feels like weeks. And having a newborn and a 3-year-old. Sleep is not what it should be.
Are you gonna get rid of one?
I'm
it just feels like a lot.
I'm thinking about an auction. You know, like I want to get my value. I've sunk a lot of money into these kids, and so I'm not just gonna just part with one easy. Now they're great though. They're really both. It's a lot of fun, but man, the sleep. I forget. It's like one of those things you black out. Like you remember that when you have a newborn, you don't sleep, but then like the second time having another kid, I was like, no, I know. It's like at first the thing that's hard is you don't get much sleep. But then as I'm in it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. It's a different type of tired. It's not like you know, most people, by the way, of course, everybody, Robbie the Fire Bernstein, King of the Cocks, COVID Jesus. Sorry, I didn't give you your intro. But you know, like most of the time throughout life, you kind of know what it feels like to not get sleep and to be tired. It's like, oh, I only got 3 hours last night. I only got 4 hours last night or something like that. But that's a different thing. You only get a few hours of sleep and then you're tired. And then, you know, I guess the next day or a couple days later, you make up for it. You get some more sleep. You get back into your schedule. When you have a newborn, it's not that you only got 3 hours last night. It's that they wake up every couple hours and then they need to feed and then they need to be changed and they need to be reswaddled and they need to be this. So you have this thing where you never get proper sleep cycles. You know, if that makes it. So you go to a point where you're like, oh, it's like months of never having ever slept for probably more than a couple hours in one sitting. And it creates this different type of like exhaustion. And then on top of all of that, today, I happen to have it's just one of those days where like at 3:45, he woke up and he was real upset. And then we had a doctor's appointment at like 9 a.m. and he was upset. It took forever to get him back down. And then I never was able to get back to sleep. I was one of those things where when you're up, you know, kind of thing. And I just couldn't get back to sleep. And so on top of all of that, I've been up since 3:45 a.m. this morning. And whew, it's a weird feeling. It's like you're doing some drug you've never done before. Like you're like, whoa, I'm in a different place. I'm in a different space than I normally am. Anyway, if I say anything dumb or racist or threatening on today's episode, completely blame it on that. It's not me.
Roseanne?
Yeah, I'm a good dude. I thought the bitch was white. All right. Anyway, what's going on with you?
I had the most fun in Chicago, and people come out for this end of year thing. It's it's cooking along. Philly and Maryland. That's this weekend. Get some tickets.
That's awesome, man. So you were doing what is this? The Winter Porch Tour? What were you doing
No, me and BK Chris, we did 2 shows. I do an end of year recap. I guess it's kind of my version of the Daily Show, but this year it's a full hour and it's punchy.
I watched last year's version. It was really great, dude.
Thanks,
like really
man.
great. I'm proud of you, dude. You've built up this thing that's like, it's so you and like fucking, and it's great and it's hilarious and it's really smart and fucking people love it, dude. I'm excited
for this year. I dig into COVID. I dig into global warming. I think it's going to be good.
Oh, great. Well, there you go. Global warming, the next COVID. That's which is coming soon. We've been talking about this for quite a while. That's the next one. Okay. So I've been, tired and delirious, and I've also been fighting on Twitter a lot lately. I've gotten back into fighting on Twitter. I knew there was something missing in my life. I just wasn't. I was having this new kid, all this other stuff going on. I just haven't been arguing with people on Twitter enough. But I don't know. So all of this was on my mind, and then this. I'll try to relate this all together. Let's see. I'm as I go stream of consciousness and see where all of this kind of comes together. But so I don't know if you saw, Rob, that a couple of neocons quit Fox News just this week, which I just think is so great. And they quit over Tucker Carlson's documentary about January 6th.
When is that actually coming out?
I'm not sure, and I have not seen it. I don't know if it's available yet, but I will watch it at some point. I think it's an interesting thing, and I like that, I'm sure we've said before on the show, but there's something funny. I think it's I think a lot of politics, it's not just about what your philosophy is or what you label yourself. Like if you're like, you consider yourself a left winger or a right winger or whatever, but a lot of it comes down to what your priorities are, what this kind of like hierarchy of outrage, like what really bothers you, and this, I think in many ways dictates more of where you fall. Like it's a more valuable political spectrum to know what makes your blood boil. Like not exactly what your worldview is, but what makes your blood boil. And this is why someone like, say, I don't know, why Scott Horton could sit down and have a conversation with some anti-war communist much more than he could with some, say, I don't know, like Republican who is like a real free market leaning Republican, like if let's say like Ted Cruz and then some anti-war communist, Scott Horton, I bet would be way more comfortable talking to the anti-war communist. You know what I mean? Because Ted Cruz is better on like monetary policy and fiscal policy and, taxes and regulation and stuff like that. But really, I don't know. That's not what makes Scott Horton's blood boil. What makes his blood boil is like wars of aggression. That you know what I'm saying? Like, not that he doesn't care about those other things, but it's just like in his hierarchy of outrage, that's at the top. And that, anyway, it's something I think about a lot. And I think that there's like, when you see people who are outraged about January 6th, or they're outraged about Donald Trump's Twitter account or something like that, where you're like, oh, so that's your hierarchy of values, your hierarchy of outrage is that it's like, well, the Capitol and democracy and the nobility of the office and all of these things. And that's just not, to me, that's stupid. That's like, okay, I mean, you could care about those things, but really, how does that even like comparable to like some of these like real human beings' lives being fucking ruined? Isn't that way worse? So anyway, I think there's something about that in there. So with Tucker, we disagree with Tucker on a lot of stuff. We actually we had done, if you remember this a few years ago, we had done so many segments disagreeing with Tucker when he was doing his whole thing where he was like really attacking libertarians, that people were saying we should start a Contra Carlson segment on the show. A whole bunch of different things that he was just talking about. Like one point he brought up Austrian economics and said that was the problem with our like economies, that too many people were devout Austrians or something. It was like just insane shit.
I think he has a general theory which hasn't come up in a while, but he does feel that we need a level of economic wealth where people have the ability to get married and live good lives. And I think he somewhat thinks that we need some socialist policies in order to get there. And every time he kind of dipped into economics and started talking about the socialist policies needed in order to make sure that there was equal wealth and opportunity for everybody, we criticized him. But when it comes to everything over this, I mean, I don't watch his show. Yeah. I only see when he's really making the news. But
The
it
clips,
seems like it seems like he's on the money with January 6th. He's been on the money with Rittenhouse. That interview was absolutely excellent. He's been on the money with COVID.
Sure. So yeah, to the stuff you were saying about that, we criticize him. And I haven't seen him talk about this a lot lately, but he has said many times that he believes, which I think is so batshit insane. And I love watching his show, but that he said that the problem with the Republicans is that they're like religiously devoted to libertarianism and to free market capitalism. And so much so that they can't see when the government needs to do X, Y, or Z. And you're like, Tucker, like the Republicans have presided over like the biggest expansions in government in world history. Like, I mean, like if a Republican, like I've said recently on a show, if a Republican, this was actually what Malice said when he was on Glenn Beck, was a great point. If a Republican under Donald Trump had proposed that we go back to the pre-Obama budget, they'd have been like, that's insane. You can't possibly go back to that. Like it's the idea that they're like committed to laissez-faire. The truth is no Republican would dare roll back Barack Obama's expansion of the government, let alone Donald Trump's even, let alone George W. Bush's. No one even has the nerve to attempt to, even suggest that we should roll back Lyndon Johnson and FDR and Woodrow Wilson or any of that. So the idea that, anyway, but all that being said, I disagree with him on all that stuff. He is, gotta say, the most interesting guy to watch in cable news. Because it's just not, it's not just like repeating dogmatic talking points. Tucker's got his own thing. And when there's the thing that you're not supposed to talk about, he's like, I want to talk about that a lot. And I like that. And also, he's been really, really great on a whole bunch of really important issues that are, at least for me, in my hierarchy of outrage, amongst the very, very top. Like, of course, the warfare state, he's been great on that since about, I think, 2005 or something like that, 2006. He's been great. But the whole time he's had Tucker Carlson tonight, just tears apart the whole military-industrial complex, the neoconservative, the results of the neoconservative, agenda. He's been really great on COVID tyranny and just exposing how insane all those people are. And then, he was great on Rittenhouse. He was great on a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's interesting. And he's thoughtful and kind of smart and kind of funny. And it's just like it's an interesting show to watch, which is very different from if you were to tell me, like, if you're talking about like Rachel Maddow or like Joy Reid or Sean Hannity or any of these other guys, I could write their script for you. I could tell you exactly what they're going to say on their next show. Like, you give me the story, I'll tell you what those guys' take is. But Tucker's not like that. Tucker, you have to listen to him and see what he says. And I appreciate that. So the neocons, like, or a couple of them at least, leaving over his thing is really interesting to me and kind of enjoyable. And I don't know. I think, I said when on the episode after Scott Horton debated Bill Kristol, that I think and I heard this back from some younger people who were like, like people my age and older, I think were like, dude, that was the sweetest thing ever. You just destroyed Bill Kristol, Irving Kristol's kid. Like, this is incredible. But then I heard like younger people who were kind of like, so what? I don't know. So this guy's out. No one believes this stuff anymore. And he's an idiot. Now, Scott was just kind of picking on some like unimpressive dork. What is this? And it's almost like they don't get it. And I try to explain it to them. Like, imagine in 20 years, Tom Woods got to debate Fauci and just wrecked him. And all the COVID shit was over by then. And everyone knew this was stupid and we never should have done it. But you just got to say. And so if you're our age, you're like, this was incredible. Because that guy was the guy. Like, it's not the perfect comparison, but it's not that far off. Like, he was the guy, and he was so wrong, and we all knew he was wrong at the time, and now look, he's got nothing. He can't even defend his track record, you know? And so that's kind of what it would be like. It's like something like that. And, you know, 20 years? Am I even right about that? As a little less, 15, say 15 years, you know? But so that's kind of what it is. And so to see these neocons, it's like now nobody even knows. But if you're my age and got into politics when I got into it, these were the guys, like the guys who were setting the agenda and in so many ways set us on this course that we're on now. And so, yeah, it's enjoyable to see them get what's theirs, if that makes sense.
I don't think Bill Kristol's an idiot. I think when you have to show up to an event and lie through your teeth and what you say makes no sense because you're lying because it made you a lot of money, you come off like a dumbass. But he's not. Same like when do you remember when Mueller finally had to show up in front of Congress and defend what he'd been doing for 2 years, and he's coming off like the world's biggest asshole. I mean, not the world's biggest asshole, the world's biggest idiot, and he seems confused on everything. That was an act. That was an act because he was covering his own ass. Yes.
See, I don't know if I agree with either of those. I think that it's possible. It's possible you're right about Mueller. I don't know. Maybe. Bill Kristol, I kind of expected, maybe this is something of my own programming where, you know, as much as I think of myself as like red pilled or whatever, there's like something that I still, you know, you kind of fall into this like thinking like, well, they're the adults who are on TV, but you know, the adults are wrong and we're right, you know. But I figured he'd have something. I figured he'd have some argument to present. There would be some way that he was going to spin this as like, this is why we're right about things. And he really had nothing. I mean, he came at it. People have watched that debate. I'm not like exaggerating. Scott would just nail him with like, but you said this at this time, and this was a lie, and this worked out this way, and in this conflict, this many people died, and this happened, and as a result of the policy you advocated for, this, and this, which is just Scott Hortoning him. And he went, well, we just have a fundamental disagreement. And you're like, well, yeah. It's a debate. Like, what do you mean? Of course you do. But what's your side of it? And like, he just literally was like, well, I mean, if you're going to just blame America for things, but well, that's, which I did, by the way. I was arguing with this right winger the other day on fucking Twitter, who I think maybe I'm setting a debate up with. I don't know if he's going to actually want to do it or not. God damn it. I'll say he was arguing with me. So kind of defending the same thing where he said a thing, you know, he said something about Somalia. You know how that's like a go-to talking point for people who hate libertarians? Oh, why don't you go move to Somalia? It's something like he was like, oh, you don't like the cops. It was hold on, right here. Let me see if I can see him here. One sec. Scott something, not Scott Horton. Scott Greer, maybe something like that. I don't know anything about the dude, but he was just trashing libertarians, and he's got like 100,000. So right now, okay, he just tweeted at me. He said something just recently. His last thing was he said, libertarians are straw men. And I said, people can't be straw men. Like, I don't think you know what a straw man is. Like, what? Like, what does that even mean? He just tweeted back at me, literally, just as I was trying to open to just get his name. Scott Greer. Yes, people can be straw men. Libertarians prove that. I've already said that I'll debate you on the necessity of police. But you're obsessed with how stateless Somalia was better than nearby African countries, and somehow W ruined it. Okay, so when I said he brought up, I'll fucking debate this guy on cops or whatever the fuck he wants to. It's fine. But he brought up, he was trashing libertarians, and I was going back and forth with him about it or whatever, and he said something, the dumb Somalia line that they always say, where they're like, oh, you don't like government, why don't you move to Somalia? And, you know, I said in some form back to him, I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I basically said back to him, I was like, well, actually, Somalia was like doing the best it's ever done when they didn't have a government. And this is true. And then George W. Bush launched a stupid war there and destroyed all the progress they were making. And, you know, I get a lot of these fucking right wingers responding to me where they're like, oh, so you're saying Somalia was like of the utopia when they didn't have any government, or there was like all this shit, and you're like, well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying they were doing better, and it's true. They had the fastest rising standard of living of any sub-Saharan African country when they didn't have a government, and then George W. Bush launched a war there, and now it's fucking all that progress was destroyed. Now, that's not saying that they were some fucking utopia or that they were on par with like a Western, advanced country. And sure, there's lots of reasons for that. I'm not disputing what any of those reasons might be. But the point is, if you're saying the issue is not having a government, well, it was better when they didn't have a government. It was better than it is when they had a communist government, for sure, and definitely under George W. Bush's war. But so then this guy responds back to me, which is just so funny how much these guys are like, why are you even arguing when you don't know what the fuck you're talking about? But he thought he fucking dunked on me, and he goes, no, idiot. It wasn't W who launched the war. You don't even know what you're talking about. W wasn't president in the 90s. And so I'm like, oh, yeah, dude, I know. I saw that Black Hawk Down movie, too. Like, I know you remember that there was a thing with Somalia in the 90s. But actually, in 2001, George W. Bush started a war in Somalia. And I think we're a few months away from it coming up on being the longest war in American history. It's just that the fucking corporate press doesn't talk about it. And so, yeah, but like, yes, no, I'm right. It was W. And his funny thing on Twitter is that he just said it with such confidence. Like he was like, ha, idiot. George W. Bush wasn't president in the 90s. And then there's a bunch of people like commenting, where they're like his people, they're like, oh, there's Dave's Aleppo moment. And then there's like these other people who are like, nah, dude, actually, it's like, you just don't know what you're talking about. Yes. So George W. Bush, and then he responded back to me and he was like, George W. Bush never invaded Somalia. And I was like, no, he didn't. He sent special operations and the CIA into Somalia and started a war there and backed like all these fucking, warlord groups. And then he goes, oh, wow, you were frantically Googling that while I responded to you. And I'm like, dude, no, I just knew that and you didn't know it. So anyway, we're having this weird back and forth. Now it had started on something about defunding the police. So maybe I'm down. Listen, by the way, I don't even mean to be shitty. Like maybe this dude's good on some issues. I don't fucking know. But he's wrong on that. And I don't like it when these right wingers have this kind of like cocky attitude trashing libertarians when they just don't know any of this shit. They don't know anything about it. Why are you debating with me about Somalia when you don't even know that there's a war going on there for the last 20 years? Like, why are you talking about it? And why are you making these stupid... At one point he goes, oh, okay, so all of Somalia is white people's problem. White people's problems. It's all our fault. Very courageous. And I responded, I go, no, not white people. George W. Bush, like one white person. Like, yeah. And again, of course, not all of their problems. Like, no one's saying that. I'm just saying that it's like they were doing better. Then we started bombing people, and now they're doing worse. It's like it's this weird thing where like if someone had like a shack and they were starting to like build it up, and like, oh, we're reinforcing the roof and building up this shack a little bit, and then someone else came and lit it on fire. And they're like, you want to live in that shack that's on fire? And I was like, well, I mean, you're the guy who lit it on fire, supported the guy who lit it on fire. I mean, that's not helpful. And they're like, oh, so you're saying it was a mansion? That's what you're trying to say? Like, no, I'm just saying the lighting it on fire made it way worse than the situation where they were building on this shack. Like, what? Anyway, so the point is right-wingers bug me sometimes. And I don't take it easy on them. And I'm not going to. And I feel like anyone I'm going to talk to or anyone I'm going to reach or anyone who I want to reach is going to be willing to hear something like that and go, all right, he's got a good point. Fine. That's like, so anyway, sorry.
I do think it's worth getting into what we expect the January 6th documentary to actually be about and why these neoconservatives were so in such an uproar that they said, this is an unapproachable topic, and if this is going to happen on Fox, I can't even work here.
Well, I think that it is, to me, it's like this. It's like January 6th has become, no matter how you feel about it, like you could still recognize this, right? And I've said this before about the Holocaust. And I'm like a Jew whose family was killed.
You thought that was awesome also? Oh,
yeah,
my bad.
I'm saying it was fucking cool. But that guy with the bullhorn shouldn't have done what he did. No, but I'm saying, even if you, like, my family was killed in the Holocaust and all of that, and, you know, it's terrible, and it happened for anyone who doesn't believe it. But you can recognize that, and then also recognize that this is kind of the central propaganda, you know, piece, and that every time there's a new war, that the neocons are like, he's the next Hitler, you know, Gaddafi's the next Hitler, and Saddam Hussein's the next Hitler, and, you know, whoever, Milosevic is the next Hitler, like whoever they want to fight a war with. And you're like, okay, no, you're using that as propaganda. So it's not even a comment on how you feel about it, but January 6th has become in many ways the center of this new propaganda campaign of the domestic war on terrorism, which I think is the centerpiece of Tucker's thing. I don't know. I don't want to speak out of turn, but this is what now has to overshadow anything you remember about the Trump administration. What you have to remember is that it ended in an insurrection. That's what that was. And you better not call it anything else. You better not say, I'm not sure that was an insurrection. To me, it seemed awfully silly. You know, like, you can't say that. So it's kind of all of these things, like, and now this discredits Trump, thus removing all of the pressure off of, say, like, never Trump neocons who were sitting there cheerleading as he was framed for treason by his own government, right? Like, that's not supposed to be the story. The story is that this guy is so bad that some people, you know, went into the Capitol on January 6th. They I don't know, trespassed, even though it's the people's house and we are the government and the government is us, or all that shit. So anyway, so I think that's part of it, that this is really a third rail, that you're not allowed to do this, because if that's true, if Tucker's even willing to entertain the questions of, were there perhaps some, you know, like government, you know, involvement in this, or some people like agitating them along. If that's true, and if this is all about a domestic war of terrorism, and if this is all about the war on terror being turned inward against right-wingers, then that whole narrative collapses.
Well, I think that's the most interesting side of the story. We watched, it was probably 4 or 5 months ago on the show, but we watched on Bill Maher, someone was talking about how the FBI needs this domestic terrorism title. And they've been playing up that, you know, we almost lost our democracy on January 6th because people took over the Capitol building and were looking to have an insurrection. If there's any possibility that the FBI orchestrated that event in order to create a domestic terrorism title and essentially put us into a different landscape of not just censorship, but a different landscape of, you know, a totalitarian government. And there's some evidence of it. I mean, it was weird the way that there was a lack of police. The fact that there's been some stuff going on between Jim Jordan and Nancy Pelosi in terms of getting the records of what the decisions were on that day. Thomas Massey had that incredible moment where he played a video. Did you see that video where there was this one guy where he literally showed footage of what's his name? Alex Jones going, "Do not go near the Capitol building." And then this one guy screaming, "We're going to the Capitol building!" And then
other people were chanting like "Fed" or something like that.
Right.
What were they like? They were like, other people there were like, no, don't do this.
We've had people that weren't charged. We've had all these incidents. You had the Michigan
reports of law enforcement amongst the rioters, and unclear what, like, that. I've made that point before. You're like, so when you say law enforcement, do you mean like your local sheriff's department, or do you mean FBI? Because all of those could be called. Right. Yeah. Like that's that. So,
and the FBI's got a track record with this stuff. We talked about with the supposed Bronx bombing. It happened in Michigan.
Yeah.
They instigate these things. They create their own news so that they can, you know, basically secure their own budget and pretend like they're doing important work.
And I would certainly say it's always crazy to me when you see like the libertarians who won't, you know, can't even entertain this possibility. It's like, well, everything you're about is like opposing the government, but you can't like fathom that like maybe the story isn't exactly as the government's telling you it is. Okay. Like you think the FBI is a criminal organization, but there's no way they would ever do something like that. Is that a whole other weird thing? But I guess like to me, kind of like the more meta big picture of this, despite me arguing with this Scott Greer guy, and now again, I'm happy to have a debate with him, and it won't even be like a bad faith debate. Like I don't know anything about the dude, and like he might be really good, because I did see a whole bunch of other people tweeting like they were like, hey, you guys would actually agree on a lot of other shit. So I'm willing to consider that maybe that's possibly true. But from my perspective, and I think from the libertarian perspective, it's kind of hard to deny this. And again, this is to what I was saying before about the whole Bill Kristol thing. Maybe it's because I'm a little bit older than some of you young folks. I'm pushing 40, and a little bit younger than some of you old folks. Go to bed. But go to bed, Grandpa. But I kind of can, I very much have in my memory, the political landscape in the 90s and the beginning of the 21st century and all of that. And to me, I think the right wingers have gotten better. They're better. Now, I still have a lot of problems with them, but they're way better than they were. And the grand narrative from the cathedral is supposed to be that they're so much worse. They're so much worse than they ever were. That's why these neocons are quitting, because it's so much worse than it's ever been before. But I just don't see that. Like, to me, I see like on everything I really care about the most, it's like, no, they're better than they ever were. Even on the stuff that the kind of corporate press would tell you is the worst aspects of Trumpism and the worst aspects of right-wing nationalism today. By and large, I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but by and large, I think they're better than they were. I mean, at this point, like real, like, oh, they're so much more racist or they're so much more nationalist. Like, dude, I guess you guys just don't remember the George W. Bush years that well. They were as nationalist and as racist as they could fuck it. It was so much worse. Your average boomer con back then was like convinced, as Horton mentioned in the debate, that them building a little Muslim, a little fucking, what do you call it? What's the Muslim church fucking called? Why? Sorry, guys, I haven't slept much at all. A mosque. So there you go. Took me a second. But then building a little mosque like 3 blocks away from the World Trade Center was like this great threat. And they were all flipping out about like Sharia law coming to America and all this. And it was all about national greatness. The whole mission of spreading democracy throughout the fucking Middle East was all about like our national moment and all this shit. And so they were totally nationalist. They totally played all these neocons who are now like, man, these right-wing rubes are a bunch of racists. They were thrilled to play on all of those racial prejudices to get the fucking shit they wanted when it was their wars overseas. As long as it was like, like fucking, the fucking neocons along with the Israeli government and Saudi Arabia and the CIA, if they were getting their way, then you could be as fucking racist as you wanted to be. You could blame every problem in the world on Islam, There's no problem with that. It's just like, if it's not suiting their agenda, then that's a really horrible thing to do. So they've even gotten cooler on, like, by and large, like they're cooler on drugs. They're cool, like even Trump passed that fucking First Step Act or whatever, and no one really had a problem with that anymore. Even like if you were like a real deal, like social progressive even, okay, which I'm not at all, but if you were, even to say like in 2004, George W. Bush was so like things were going so bad already that he ran on, I don't know if you remember this, Rob, but their big thing was that they were going to make a constitutional amendment to enshrine that marriage was between a man and a woman. And like,
I think marriage should be between you and whoever you can put your dick into.
Yeah. Well, that is the law of the land today, my friend. But but like, no, they're not doing that shit anymore. Like, so it's just a weird like disconnect, and maybe we'll get into some of that today. Anyway, so Jonah Goldberg wrote an article about leaving Fox News over this Tucker Carlson piece. So perhaps we could read it. Jonah Goldberg, for people who don't know, was I believe his title, he was the senior editor at National Review. And
he sounds like a real Jew.
He's one of ours, Rob. Let's say he is one of ours. A
lot of bad press these days.
Oh, let's just be honest. We're not doing ourselves any favors, which has always been my message. All right. So Jonah Goldberg, who was a real Bush guy and was one of the top guys at National Review. Not quite as big of fish as Bill Kristol, I suppose, but like one tier underneath him, if even that, like one of those top neocon guys. So this was his piece. It ran in the LA Times, very reputable, trustworthy newspaper. And the piece is titled, "I left Fox News after 12 years. Tucker Carlson's Patriot Purge was the final straw." All right. So here's the piece. "I quit Fox News after more than a decade as a contributor. So did my business partner and friend, Steve Hayes," another one of them, another neocon. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see them thrown out. In a way, it like I'm almost trying to like find these comparisons, but it would be kind of like MSNBC, completely going a different direction from Rachel Maddow to the point that she felt she had to quit. That's what's kind of interesting from my perspective of being so aware of shit back then,
And lesbians tell women they have to have long hair.
Yeah, that's where MSNBC has gone, and Rachel Maddow has to quit. Picture that. That's Fox News. That's Stephen Hayes and fucking Jonah Goldberg not feeling at home at Fox News. That's what it's like.
Or MSNBC just says that they're no longer engaging in pure entertainment. And so if you say things that are horribly wrong, you're actually going to be held legally accountable. And Rachel's like, well, I don't fit in here then.
I will say that to me, the average Republican voter and so many influential Republican thought leaders completely rejecting neoconservatism is about as much of a revolution in the way they operate as it would be if in, say, 10 years, the Democrats, MSNBC, like their biggest shows and the average Democratic voter completely rejected wokeism. Like if they were like, hey, we just don't want to hear about this. Hey, if you accuse someone of racism, you better have a really good example of like where they were a racist. And if you accuse someone of like sexual harassment, I need to see proof that this is, and we really hate the idea of just these accusations. And we don't, and the idea that did you just call America a racist country? That's like, you cannot do that. It's like that big of a transformation, which by the way, also might be something to think about, that these transformations are possible. And this is one of the problems when people say, well, this is the way things are going to go in the future. It's like, no, things don't always go in a straight trajectory. They change. So
or
anyway.
in liberty terms is like if Ron Paul started a news network and was all in the Fed and they started talking about universal basic income 10 years later and we're like, we can't work here anymore. Yeah. That's what happens to these guys. They're like, we're all about selling wars. And all of a sudden you're talking about.
Not exactly. Kind of something like that. But a corporate press, entity. But yeah. All right. So he writes, Jonah Goldberg writes, "We explained our reasons on the Dispatch, a media company we founded." The Dispatch, that is. But the decision was a long time coming. Like Ernest Hemingway's description of bankruptcy, it came gradually and then suddenly. The sudden part came thanks to Fox News host Tucker Carlson's streaming special Patriot Purge. It's a perfect example of propaganda that weaves half-truths into a whole lie. It insinuates that the January 6th riots at the Capitol might have been a false flag operation orchestrated by the FBI or the deep state. Worse, it suggests that the Biden administration is coming for the real patriots, i.e. Trump voters. Quote, the domestic war on terror is here, says one of the, quote, experts in Patriot Purge. It's coming after half the country.
Can you pause for a sec?
Sure.
All right. So off the bat, the claim of that the January 6th might have been orchestrated by the FBI is a very important question. Now, I'm not saying that that's factually accurate, but to put forward the question, was this orchestrated by the FBI or did it have the government have involvement in it, might be one of the most important questions that the corporate media would be asking and looking into. So
yeah.
that is a great question to be exploring.
You certainly want to rule it out.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. Okay, there's two things here that are my thoughts on this right away, right? So number one, the language here is kind of telling. And this is unfortunately where, part of, so let me say this, for example, right? When like in the Libertarian Party, when Joe Jorgensen tweeted, it's not enough to not be racist, we must be anti-racist. Or when they'll constantly just tweet, we condemn bigotry as irrational and repugnant, right? That may not have been such a sin in a different time. Like if you said that in the 80s or something like that, even if you said it like in the wrong way, people might have just gone like, all right, whatever, that's fine. You can say that, yeah, we're not racist, so like, sure. Who fucking cares? That's good. Yeah, racism is bad. What are we talking about? People being like really overtly shitty to people of other races because they're of that race? Okay, yeah, we don't like that, But the reason why so many people react against that now is because it's like, well, I don't know, if you haven't realized, we're kind of living through a moment of woke hysteria, where everything is called racist and everything is called sexist and everything is like, like if you don't know the new gender pronoun that someone just invented 3 minutes ago, they call you a transphobe, a term that didn't even like exist 5 minutes ago. You know what I'm saying? So like, I remember I tweeted like a few months ago something about like, I was like, I don't know, man, like to me, libertarians, we care about like war and slavery and like debt and destruction of property and all this. Like, I don't really have time to, think about transphobia or some shit. And then a few of these woke libertarians, they go, that is so transphobic of you to say that. And I was like, that's transphobic. Just to say it's not my highest priority is to say like I don't care. Okay, fine. So we're living in this moment of absolute hysteria about all of this shit. So in that moment, when you come out and start like just tweeting this, like, what are you at? This is like, you're just going along with the hysteria right now. Like, this isn't like adding anything else. And so in this moment, when someone, when someone goes to you, they go, hey, that guy's a Nazi. It just, maybe in some other moment that would hold more weight. But nowadays when someone says that, I'm like, I don't know. I've been called a Nazi. A lot of people I know who aren't at all Nazis have been called that. So like, what do you even mean? Like, now I got to go find out for myself whether this actually is saying that. And so I'll be curious to go watch whether he's actually, like, I don't even know how to take this because I listen, I notice these things now, how people put this language. And so I'll read the sentence one more time. It insinuates that January 6th, that the January 6th riot at the Capitol might have been a false flag operation. So insinuates that might. So I know when you just read that sentence quickly, it almost comes off like he's saying Tucker Carlson claimed this was a false flag. But no, it's not that. And he's not even saying Tucker Carlson claims this might. He's saying he insinuates that it might. So as soon as I'm just trained at this point that as soon as I read a sentence like that, I'm like, let me see what he's actually saying. Let me see what he's actually saying. Because I don't buy this. That's a very tricky sentence You know what I mean?
And it's a very important question to be asking. And another very important question to be asking when he's saying, well, how dare the government attack the patriots, which are Trump supporters, to just put the other perspective on it. It's like, no. There's certain people that voted for Trump and cared about Trump, and that's who they wanted to be their president. And so everyone should have a voice. Even the people, I wasn't a Trump supporter. I don't agree with these Trump supporters, but I do think that if a lot of people want a president and you want to exist within a democracy, which is not even the structure I like, you got to respect these people's opinion.
Right. Okay. So, and building on that, this is what I was going to say. So that was my first point, is just the way the sentence is worded and how tricky that is. But the second thing I take away from that is that it's like something I hate, that I've always hated, is when someone's, and this is way bigger than this topic or any other topic. This is just generally, right? When someone is going to accuse you of taking a position, and even if they're going to, and then even worse, if they're accusing you of insinuating that this might be your position, right? But they say that, and it's like, okay, so what should your response to that be then? I mean, if this is so outlandish, then I would think your response to that would be like, well, here's why that makes no sense. And here's an argument that just destroys you, right? Like, that's the point. Like I was saying with that guy before, it was like, oh, yeah, actually, that was the 90s. I'm like, well, here's an argument that destroys you. No, it wasn't. It's not even an argument. I guess it's just facts, but like something like that. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, one of our favorites, Sheath Underwear. Sheath makes the most comfortable boxer briefs I've ever worn in my life. It is the only underwear that I wear. So if you want to wear the underwear of Dave Smith, you got to put on a pair of Sheath. But seriously, they're just the best. If you're sick of boxers that are too loose or briefs that are too tight, check out Sheath. You're going to love them. The stretchy fabric is made out of a moisture wicking technology. They're incredibly comfortable. They keep everything cool, right in place. Sheath is particularly useful for staying cool during the working out or in the summer and hot environments. But I don't know, it's getting colder out and I'm still loving my Sheath underwear. So whatever the temperature is, put on a pair of Sheath, the most comfortable boxer briefs you will ever wear. They have the dual pouches. They're a game changer. If you don't like them, you don't even have to use them. You can just wear them like a regular pair of underwear. But I recommend giving it a shot. It keeps everything right where it's supposed to be. You'll never go back to the old school. You'll always want Sheath underwear after this. Sheathunderwear.com. That's where you will get the most comfortable underwear you will ever own. And if you use the promo code Problem20, you'll also get 20% off your entire order. Sheathunderwear.com, promo code Problem20 for 20% off. All right, let's get back into the show. So I'm from the old school where I feel like you have to have an argument back. You have to point out why this is so stupid and not just go, he said this thing. And that's too much for me. But really, just you tell me, what does he give you here? Okay, it insinuates that January 6th riots at the Capitol might have been a false flag operation orchestrated by the FBI or the deep state. Worse, it suggests that the Biden administration is coming for the real patriots, the Trump voters. The domestic war on terror is here, says one expert in the Patriot Purge. It's coming after half the country. Here's the argument that he'll give you. This dangerous nonsense was the last straw for me and Steve. It was an unhappy decision for us. We have many friends at the network, and there are many people, particularly on the news side, that do good, honest journalism.
So just to pause you there for a second, this ridiculousness of how dare you question the FBI, where what did they just do to Trump with the FISA warrants? That's totally been unraveled. We also, this past week, I think there was $150 or $160 million fine that they're paying because they settled a case because they failed to
the gymnast thing,
prevent a school shooting. No, it was a school shooting.
Oh, the school shooting thing. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, what has this organization done? What is their track record over the last 3 years that you can't possibly go, hey, are they doing a good job? Hey, is government possibly not looking out for the best interests of some of its citizens?
Right, and even to suggest like something like that, like where you're saying, oh, well, like even insinuating that you might believe that the FBI could have been involved in a false flag or an entrapment type deal, that's just too far for me. Like, what is that? What type of like fucking, I don't know, like college white lady shit is that? And that just offended me. And so I left my post for over a decade at a network. Like, okay, fine. Like, but like, like what I think an adult should expect in that situation is just and here's why this is such an absurd claim, because X, Y, and Z. And here's the evidence that didn't happen, that this documentary is ignoring. Okay, if you gave me that, you'd go, okay, well, let's look at the argument and see what he's saying. But just this like, oh, God. Well, I'm offended by that. I just hate that. I hate that. And I hate that so much in our culture writ large. Like, I just hate it. I hate that, like, you can just say I'm offended, and that's supposed to be some type of like value. Christopher Hitchens had a great line about that, where he said, he goes, my only response to people when they say they're offended is, so what? And that's the only response you should ever say. If someone says, I'm offended, like, so what? Who cares? Who cares if you're offended? Like, what does that even mean? Like, anyone who's making a somewhat interesting, compelling, important argument is always going to offend someone. So it doesn't mean anything that you're offended. You know, abolitionists offended slave owners. Doesn't mean anything. Anyone important offends someone. So, okay, you're offended. Now give me your point. Now can we get on to what your argument is? And so I just hate that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's a form of censorship where they go, I can't even listen to your idea. We can't even explore this topic because it offends my sensibility. Well, why don't we have a conversation? If I'm wrong, then you can tell me why I'm wrong. And then, yeah, maybe I'll even apologize for my thought. Maybe I'll even say that was a bad or dark thought and you're right. I hadn't considered it from your perspective. But when you just go, hey, we can't even explore it, that's a form of censorship.
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. It's the censorship impulse for sure. You know what I mean? Like that's how you treat ideas that are not allowed in. Not that you have to defeat them or take them on, but that you just, scoff at them. And then this is the line that really gets me. Is he goes, so people asked why it took you so long to leave Fox News. It says the short answer is we hoped and had reason to believe that Fox would get back on course, and we wanted to get it there. If your view is that Fox News was always irredeemably bad, that explanation will fall flat. I can't help you there. But for us, the release of Patriot Purge was proof that waiting for Fox to get back on track would be like waiting for Got it?
Waiting for Godot. I think that was a movie.
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
I never saw it, but I think it's
I never saw it.
movie.
Okay. Anyway, so this is the essence of where the rubber meets the road. So I guess getting Fox News back on track is to like back on track when you, and you specifically, Jonah Goldberg, and you, Stephen Hayes, when you were selling the American people on the bold-faced lie that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and that he was in bed with Osama bin Laden, and that led to a war that killed like 1 million people, at least as a result of the war, and destroyed the country, and then led to like 5 subsequent wars after that. That's back on track. Somehow that's not as bad. It's like the idea that you'd even question, not even question, but insinuate that you may believe that the FBI was involved in something. Well, then we got to walk. But if you not only insinuate that you may believe, but directly state that you know that, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, and that leads to a whole war, well, that's just a whoopsie. That's just what we in the business call a whoopsie. We got to get back on track to that. See, this is the shit that I can't stand. And anybody who goes along with kind of like praising these guys for doing that or supporting them, you can't do that without kind of somehow brushing that other part under the rug. Like, if you accept that this is so much worse, you have to accept that a whole bunch of people going into the Capitol, whatever you think their intentions may have been, look, you want to call this an insurrection all day long, fine. These people were absolutely no threat to actually overthrow the government of the United States of America. Does that need to be said? Do I actually need to make an argument to you about how there was no way that these people were actually going to overthrow this country? I mean, come on. Take me through this. How does it actually happen where the fucking military doesn't just come in there and fucking destroy these people if they actually did anything, right? So even that, like, you know, that woman died. She was unarmed and shot and killed by the Capitol Police, not by the insurrectionists, right? But you're going to compare that to like wars that cost trillions of dollars and led to hundreds of thousands of people dying, and you still get to walk out on your high horse like, oh, Fox News has gone now what? They've gone conspiratorial. Okay. And this is what's so infuriating. It's like, so you're saying that like we can, you know, nobody ever goes like, oh, you know, there were those people who claimed that Gaddafi was about to go genocidal. That was kind of a conspiracy. There was never really any evidence of that. And whoopsies, we destroyed Libya.
Hey, we're able to get the slave markets reopened, so that worked out well. That
is true. If you're in the business for Libyan slaves, business is a booming. But if you're not, and you're in the, you know, business of caring about human beings, that was a pretty big mistake. But that's okay. But somehow Tucker's not allowed to make that. While everyone else is just repeating the same boring, you know, dogma about January 6th. Oh, this guy made a documentary about it. I don't know. Anyway, all this article does is kind of spark my interests to go watch it. So I'll be doing that. Hope you guys do too.
I never watched Tucker's shit, but I'm fascinated by this one.
Yeah, it's a good one. All right, listen, we're gonna wrap up on that, and we'll be back soon. Rob, plug whatever else you got.
RobbieTheFire.com/shows. I'm doing a whole bunch of cities, end of year run. You know, after I do this run, never doing this material again. So buy a ticket, come support.
There you go. Go check out Robbie the Fire Bernstein. And yeah, we'll be back soon. Peace.